Welcome to Betrayal Narrative X.
I always thought the worst thing that could happen in a marriage was divorce. It turned out to be much worse to realize that you'd spent the last months living under the same roof with a traitor, sharing a bed with a cheater who'd already decided how she was going to divide your assets. She didn't just cheat on me. She was going to leave me with nothing, leaving me for a rich lover. But she had no idea that this perfect man was already part of my plan. She thought she was playing me, but I was actually the one who set the pieces on the board, and her royal move would be the beginning of her own downfall. And that's just the way it was. I've long sensed something had changed in our marriage. It wasn't sudden, it wasn't abrupt, it was gradual, almost imperceptible. When you live with a person for years, you begin to notice even the little things. How he smiles, how he looks, how he answers your questions. My wife, Donna, suddenly became different. Everything seemed the same appearance, the same voice, the same habit of putting the cup of tea to the right of the plate. But there was something different in the way she looked at me, the way she spoke, the way she touched my shoulder, as if out of politeness. It took me a while to realize what was going on. At first I blamed it on stress, work, fatigue. We'd been married for 6 years. The routine could dull my senses. But then the real alarm bells started ringing. She started coming home late from work, checking her phone more often, smiling at someone when she thought I couldn't see. And then there was the smell, a perfume I hadn't given her, and which she seemed to really like. I'm not an impulsive person. Instead of making jealous scenes, I decided to watch. Just watch, listen, and wait. I wanted proof, not conjecture, not speculation, but clear facts she couldn't argue with. And I got them sooner than I expected. One evening, when Donna said she'd be late again, I drove to her office. I didn't get out of the car, just waited, watching the entrance. 20 minutes later, she didn't come out alone. A tall man in an expensive suit was holding her by the waist, and she was looking at him in a way she hadn't looked at me in a long time. They got into his car, and I followed. They stopped at a luxurious restaurant in the center of the city. From the looks of it, it was going to be a long and romantic evening. I didn't want to spoil their date. I didn't just want to catch them together, but to see how far things had gone. Later, when she came home, I pretended to be asleep. She walked quietly into the bedroom, sat on the bed, and took a deep breath. I could smell the scent of men's cologne on her clothes. Now I had the information. I just had to figure out how to use it. After that night, I couldn't look at her the same way I used to. Every time Donna smiled at me or said the usual, "How was your day?" I could hear the lie in her voice. She thought she had everything under control, that her little affair would go unnoticed. But she was wrong. I wasn't an idiot who would accept the role of a cheating husband. If she chose to betray me, I would make her life a nightmare. A plan began to form in my head as I sat at work, pretending to do my normal routine. Before acting, I needed more information. Who is this man? How long have they had this going on? How far had they gone? I decided to take my time and gather all the clues I could so I could strike at the right moment. The next day, I followed her again after work. It was the same. The office, the restaurant, the hugging, the languid glances. But now I was prepared. I had pre-installed a small camera on the dashboard of the car and recorded everything that happened. Every kiss, every touch. It all became part of my proof. A few days later, I found out who the man was. His name was Richard Coleman. He was the owner of a large company, and, from the looks of it, he was used to getting everything he wanted. Rich, confident, used to the attention of women, and now he's decided he can have my wife. But I found out the best part later. Turns out Donna had already started preparing for the divorce. She was consulting with lawyers, researching what assets she could claim, what accounts she could freeze. She planned to leave nicely, leave me with nothing, and start a new life with Richard. Oh, that's nice. When I found out, anger was replaced by cold-blooded calculation. If she thought she was going to come out of this beautifully, I was going to make sure she left humiliated, ruined, and without a dime. I started by meeting her best friend, Cynthia. They'd been friends for over a decade, but Cynthia had always treated me with respect. I knew she wouldn't approve of betrayal, and I was right. When I showed her the tapes of Donna kissing Richard, she was shocked. "Shit, I don't believe it. Cynthia covered her face with her hands. How could she? That's what I'm wondering, I replied, pretending I was still shocked. Kimberly wasn't just Donna's friend. She was a receptionist at a large law firm, and she was the person my wife consulted with lawyers through. Now I had access to all the information about her plans. I began to prepare the unveiling. I needed a moment when she would feel completely safe, confident of victory. The perfect moment came a week later. Donna was going to host a dinner for friends and family to finally announce our amicable divorce. She thought everyone would support her, feel sorry for her, and tell her she was doing the right thing. Except she had a very different night ahead of her. I decided that simple exposure wasn't enough. If she wanted a public show, I'd make it so she'd be begging for the night to be over. I wouldn't just expose her. I'd make a scene she'd remember forever. She wanted to be the center of attention, but she had no idea what role I had prepared for her. Everything had to be perfectly timed. I waited until the day of dinner and purposely acted like nothing had happened. I even pretended that I supported her decision to break up peacefully and didn't mind maintaining a good relationship. She smiled at me as if she had already won, as if I was just an obstacle that could be easily moved out of the way. I'm so glad we're breaking up without scandal, she said as she put her salad on. Of course, I replied, hiding a smirk. You deserve the best. The guests began to gather closer to 8 in the evening. The atmosphere in the house was warm. Everyone was chatting, laughing, discussing the latest news. I didn't interfere, watching, waiting for the right moment. When people relaxed a little, and Donna felt like she was in control of the situation, I went into the other room and pulled out my phone. I found Richard's secretary's number in advance and, using a fake social networking account, wrote to her, identifying myself as Donna. I asked her to send the chief an urgent message. I was expecting him for dinner, and I wanted to introduce him to my friends. Of course, he didn't expect such an invitation, but why would he refuse? He thought I was just a stupid, cheating husband who didn't suspect their relationship. He probably even thought it was a good opportunity to show how generous he was. When the doorbell rang, I looked at Donna. She raised her eyebrows in surprise, clearly not expecting new guests. One of my friends went to open the door, and a few seconds later, Richard appeared in the living room. He was as confident as ever. Expensive suit, well-groomed hair, the easy smile of a man accustomed to winning. He looked around, clearly expecting to see Donna alone, but he ran into dozens of curious eyes. The guests froze, some glanced around, and some began to guess that something interesting was about to happen. Donna turned pale, but tried to keep her face. Richard? Her voice shook, but she still managed to smile. Donna, I got your message, he replied, genuinely puzzled. You wanted me to come. She hesitated, looked at me, then at the guests. I paused for a moment, savoring the moment, and then made an innocent face. Honey, you never told me who Richard was. I thought he was a co-worker of yours. You used to say you were working late so often. She swallowed, her lips trembling, but there was nothing to say. The guests were whispering, and someone shook their heads incredulously. Cynthia grinned and crossed her arms over her chest, clearly realizing what had just happened. Richard frowned, beginning to realize that something was wrong. He looked at Donna, then at me, and then he realized abruptly. He was far from stupid, and he realized he'd been led into a trap. Donna, what's going on here? He spoke in a different tone of voice. Yeah, Donna, what's going on? I looked at her with feigned curiosity. Maybe you want to tell everyone yourself. She opened her mouth in confusion, but she couldn't get a word out. Her whole beautiful fairy tale was crumbling right before her eyes, and there was nothing to be done. The guests had already realized what had happened, and all I had to do was deliver the final blow. I grabbed my phone and opened a video of her and Richard kissing outside the restaurant. I turned the sound up to full volume and raised the screen so everyone could see. Oh, isn't that you, dear? I asked, pretending I just remembered. The guests gasped, someone covered their mouths with a hand, and Donna blushed and stepped back as if she hoped to disappear. You purposely she started, but I interrupted. Of course it was on purpose. Did you think I'd be so stupid as not to notice? Richard cursed, clearly unprepared for this turn of events. He gave Donna a look of annoyance and took a step toward the exit. Sorry, but I didn't sign up for this kind of drama. He muttered and walked out the door without even saying goodbye. Donna was left standing alone, surrounded by friends who were no longer hiding their judgment. Some looked at her with pity, but most just looked away. I poured myself some wine, took a sip, and smiled. Well, darling, is this the night you wanted to remember? I don't think you'll ever forget it. She lowered her head, realizing she had lost. Donna looked as if the ground was shifting out from under her feet. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for someone to support her, someone to stand by her side. But even her closest friends couldn't hide their disappointment. Everything she'd so carefully planned had crumbled in minutes, and now she stood before me disgraced, confused, and utterly helpless. I didn't hurry with the final blow. I wanted her to feel this moment, to realize the hopelessness of her situation. In the morning she thought she was smarter than me, thought that I would accept her terms, agree to her fair divorce, and let her go to a rich lover with part of my property. But now her beautiful plan has turned to ashes. The guests began to disperse, feeling uncomfortable. No one wanted to witness her humiliation any longer than necessary. Cynthia gave me a quick glance that showed both gratitude and respect. She knew I was planning the unveiling, but she hadn't expected it to be so spectacular. When the last person walked out the door, the house was tensely silent. Donna lifted her head slowly, anger flashing in her eyes, replaced by despair. She was cornered, and I could see her trying to think of some ruse to escape. You think you've won? Her voice trembled, but there was an attempt at pride in it. I grinned, picked up a glass of wine from the table, and took a sip. I don't think I know, I replied calmly. Now let's discuss the details of the divorce. She frowned, not understanding what I was getting at. Divorce? She interjected, trying to get control of the situation again. Yes, but not the way you planned. I set my glass on the table and crossed my arms over my chest. Tomorrow morning, my lawyers will file the papers. All the assets, all the accounts, everything we had, stays with me. You'll walk out of here with nothing. She opened her mouth, but I raised my hand, stopping her. You don't have to try to argue. I know you consulted lawyers. I know you wanted half, maybe more. But I have enough evidence of your cheating, and the judge will side with me. Donna turned pale. She knew I was telling the truth. In our state, adultery is a serious argument for property division, and I had hard evidence. You can't do that. She tried to object, but her voice sounded unsure. I smiled, sensing the panic in her voice. I can do it, and I will. I leaned closer, looking her straight in the eye. You betrayed me. You tried to destroy everything we built. Now I'm just paying you back. Donna swallowed, took a step back, and lowered her gaze. She had nowhere to run, no one to hide behind. She knew she'd lost, that I'd calculated everything, and now she had no options left. I turned around, grabbed a file folder from the nightstand, and tossed it on the table in front of her. It's all set up here. You can sign right now, or you can wait for the trial, where you'll lose everything. The choice is yours. She looked at the papers as if they were a death sentence. I could see her fists clenched, her fingers trembling. She had hoped to leave beautifully, with money, with a new life, but now only shame and emptiness awaited her. A few minutes passed while she struggled with herself. I watched silently, not rushing her. Finally, she took the pen slowly, took a deep breath, and signed. I nodded, picking up the papers. That's great. Now pack your things. You have exactly 1 hour to leave this house. She raised her head sharply, but it was clear from her face that she wasn't going to argue anymore. It was over. I turned and left the room, leaving her alone with broken dreams and the bitter realization that she had destroyed her own life. Donna sat on the couch, clutching the pen like she could break it in her fingers. Her face was nothing but helplessness, but I knew she was seething with emotion. An hour ago, she had felt like the mistress of the situation, confident of her victory, and now she had to sign documents that left her with nothing. But that wasn't enough for me. To defeat her plans was one thing, but to make her break down, to admit her meanness in front of everyone, was quite another. I took a couple steps in her direction, crossing my arms over my chest, enjoying the silence in which she was probably contemplating how she should live her life now. Did you think you could trick me and leave nicely? I spoke calmly, without emotion, just stating a fact. Donna slowly looked up at me, her eyes a mixture of anger, shame, and fear. She wanted to say something, perhaps to justify herself or to throw another lie in my face, but she knew that nothing more could be said. All you have to do now is admit your mistake. I paused, watching her lips tighten. You're going to tell everyone the truth, Donna. Right here in front of me. She exhaled sharply, as if I'd hit her with the words. Are you kidding me? Her voice shook, but there was still resistance in it. No, I'm dead serious. I sat across from her, looking her straight in the eye. You're going to tell me you betrayed me, that you tried to deceive me, that you wanted to take half the property you don't deserve, and only then will I let you go. She turned away. Her fingers clenched so tight her knuckles turned white. She couldn't bear to hear it, but she knew she had no choice. Her lover had left her. Her friends had turned their backs on her. She had no money left, and the only person who could let her get out of this with any dignity was sitting in front of her now. Several minutes passed before she slowly rose from the couch. You want me to humiliate myself? Her voice was barely audible. No, Donna. You've already humiliated yourself by starting this sordid spectacle. I picked up the wine glass and took a slow sip. Now just admit it out loud. She closed her eyes, as if trying to pull herself together. Then she took a deep breath and forced out the words I knew she was struggling to say. I betrayed you. I remained silent, giving her the opportunity to continue. I thought I could pull it off. Her voice was strained. That you'd be naive, that you wouldn't notice. I wanted a divorce, to leave you with the bare minimum, to start a new life. I stared at her without blinking. She closed her eyes, clenched her fists, and seemed to make an incredible effort on herself. I was wrong. Her voice shook, but she continued. What I did was despicable. I tried to use you, and I deserved what I got. There was silence in the room again. I gave her a few seconds to realize what she just said. Her shoulders shook, like she was struggling to keep from crying, but I didn't care. I got up, grabbed my papers from the desk, put them in a folder, and headed for the door. Okay, Donna, you can pack your things now. You have half an hour. She looked at me with an expression that was so full of pain that I might have felt sorry for her once. But now I felt nothing but satisfaction. I gave her one last look, then opened the door and walked out, leaving her alone with her defeat. I should have been relieved, but there was still an unpleasant residue inside. Donna had gotten what she deserved, but there was another person in this story who had quietly walked away without paying a price. Richard Coleman. Did he really think he could ruin someone else's family and just get away with it? Did he think money gave him the right to take whatever he wanted, even another man's wife? I couldn't let him enjoy life before he even realized what a mistake he'd made. I wasn't going to act without a plan. Revenge is not an emotional outburst, but a carefully thought-out operation in which every detail must work toward the end result. I spent the next few days researching his life, his contacts, his business connections. The deeper I dug into the information, the more I realized how vulnerable he was, despite his wealth. Richard was a man who was used to building an illusion. In the eyes of the public, he looked like a respectable entrepreneur, a successful manager, and a model citizen. His company was flourishing. He gave interviews, talked about his high moral values that supposedly helped him in business. But behind this facade was a man who was used to getting what he wanted by any means necessary. He slept with married women, used his employees as expendable material, and didn't give a damn about any obligations. I found what I needed. His company had once been involved in a serious scandal involving contract fraud. He'd gotten away with it thanks to his connections and money, but I knew he wouldn't get a second chance. A week after Donna's reveal, I texted him from an unknown number. Richard, I know about your deals. You're about to lose everything. The answer came quickly. Who are you? I grinned, imagining his face at that moment. The man who was used to controlling everything suddenly felt someone holding him by the throat. I wasn't going to reveal my cards right away. I needed him to start digging for himself, making mistakes. You'll find out soon enough. You ruined someone else's family. Now it's your life's turn to fall apart. After that, I disconnected the phone and destroyed the SIM card. He could call all he wanted, but there would be no answer. Now he had to live in fear, waiting for the blow that would surely come. The next step was to pass on the information I had gathered to journalists. Copies of documents confirming his involvement in the fraud were sent to several major publications. I knew that money could shut many people up, but not all. There would always be one honest journalist, especially if he had a personal vendetta against the likes of Coleman. A couple of days later, the first articles began to appear online. The headline screamed that successful businessman Richard Coleman is involved in financial fraud. An investigation has been launched against Richard Coleman's company. The authorities are interested in Coleman's contracts. I followed this with cold satisfaction, knowing that this was only the beginning. I could have stopped there, but I needed to see his face when he realized he'd lost. I knew where he ate dinner on Fridays, where he met his business associates. I got there at 8 o'clock sharp and took a table in the far corner, where it was easy to watch. Richard appeared half an hour later. He was wearing an expensive suit, but his look betrayed fatigue and irritation. Apparently, news of the investigation had reached him, and he was trying to figure out who was behind it. I waited, watching as he sat down at his desk, ordered himself a whiskey, and opened his phone, nervously checking his messages. I stood up and walked slowly toward him. When he looked up and met my gaze, his face was a mixture of surprise and fury. "You," he exhaled, clearly not expecting to see me. I sat down across from him without asking permission and pretended I was just an old acquaintance stopping by to say hello. "Rough day, Richard?" I asked with a slight smile, watching him clench his fist. "Is that you?" His voice was quiet but threatening. "I don't know what you mean." I shrugged. "But if you're referring to the problems with your company, well, maybe it's just fate." His face tensed, and he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You don't realize who you're dealing with. I have connections, money. If you think you can ruin my life, you're wrong." I laughed, leaning back. "That's interesting," I said thoughtfully. "But you know what your problem is, Richard. You're used to thinking that money solves everything. But money can't buy a good reputation when it's ruined. It won't save you when people are afraid to get involved with you. And it certainly won't help when the competition smells blood." He was breathing hard, trying not to snap, but I could see he understood every word I was saying. "What do you want?" he finally asked. I slowly leaned forward, holding his gaze. "I need you to remember this moment. I need you to realize that you can't just take someone else's stuff with impunity, thinking you'll get away with it." He was silent, and I knew I had achieved my goal. He'd already lost. He just didn't realize it until later. I stood up, left the bill for my drink on the table, and turned around, heading for the exit. Behind me, I heard him clench the glass in his hand, his breathing becoming ragged. He was broken, and now he had to live the rest of his life, knowing that he couldn't win. As I walked out of the restaurant, a calmness swept over me. The story was over. I could finally put it all behind me. When I left the restaurant, it was cool outside. The air smelled of fall freshness, and the city was living its usual life. People were going about their business. Some were laughing, some were talking on the phone, and I stood in the middle of the chaos and felt strangely empty. I had done everything I had planned, exposed my wife, ruined her lover's life, made them experience what they themselves wanted to inflict on me. But somehow it didn't bring the satisfaction I expected. I thought there would be relief after it all, but instead there was only emptiness inside. I didn't regret my actions. They both got what they deserved, and I wasn't going to stop myself from thinking about morality. They deserved their fate, and I was merely the instrument of their punishment. But now that that chapter was closed, I was faced with another problem. What next? I went to my car, started the engine, but didn't move. The rearview mirror reflected the street, lit by the streetlights, the people walking by, and the restaurant I just left. I pictured Richard sitting there, glass in hand, realizing that his life would never be the same again. I knew he would try to pull through, look for ways to save his reputation, but he wouldn't have enough time. Journalists would keep digging, the investigation would gain momentum, investors would start leaving, and competitors would start gnawing at his business like hungry wolves. I made him feel what I felt when I realized my wife had betrayed me. And rightly so. I didn't notice as my fingers started drumming on the steering wheel. The adrenaline that had kept me going all these days was starting to subside, and now new thoughts were creeping into my head. If I could break this man's life so easily, what else could I do? The thought didn't scare me. On the contrary, it ignited something new inside. I used to live by the rules, to obey the laws, to believe that doing the right thing was the key to a peaceful life. But now I knew the truth. The world belongs not to those who play fair, but to those who understand how to exploit the weaknesses of others. Those who hurt are rarely held accountable for their actions, unless there's someone who takes justice into his own hands. I wasn't a hero. I didn't believe in the highest ideals of justice, but I realized I could destroy lives the way Richard had destroyed mine. Only I did it smarter, more precisely, leaving behind only ruins that could never be rebuilt. I typed a few names into the search engine. People I'd heard of before, people who'd made their fortunes by cheating, destroying families, taking advantage of other people's weaknesses. The more I read, the more I realized there are too many like Richard. They feel untouchable because society protects them, because there are always those around who will turn a blind eye to their sins for profit. I didn't want to be a part of that society anymore. My phone vibrated, and a new message popped up on the screen. The number was unknown to me. You made me lose, but you can't stop. I squinted, rereading the words over and over. Who is it? Richard? Or was it someone else? Was it a warning or a confession? I smiled. He was right. I won't be able to stop. I started the car and drove slowly into the empty street. Ahead of me was a new road, full of people who thought they could play with the fates of others with impunity. I was no longer the man I had been before. I had a new purpose now. I became someone they were afraid to meet. To those who punish those who habitually destroy other people's lives with impunity. And I was just getting started. I drove through the city at night, taking my time, just watching the streets empty and the windows and the houses go out one by one. People went back to their apartments, closed their doors, hugged their loved ones, and fell asleep with a sense of peace. I thought about how much things had changed in the last few weeks. It seemed that not so long ago I was living in an illusion of happiness, believing that my marriage was strong and that my wife sincerely loved me. Now I knew the truth, but I no longer felt any pain or anger. Everything I wanted to do, I had done. This chapter of my life was closed. I realized I could have taken a different path. Obsession with revenge is a trap that is easy to fall into. Many people, after betrayal, never find the strength to move on, dwelling on the past, on those who betrayed them, on the pain they'd been hurt. But I wasn't going to let that history define the rest of my life. I had dealt with my enemies, brought them to their knees, and made them feel what I had experienced. Now I wasn't just going to live. I was going to actually enjoy this life, without looking back. I turned toward the waterfront and parked near a small cafe that was open until late at night. It was one of those places where people came to be alone, to drink coffee, and to think. I ordered a cappuccino and sat by the window, watching the sparse traffic go by on the deserted streets. May I? I looked up and saw a woman standing next to my table. She wore a light coat, her brown hair falling to her shoulders, and her eyes showed a slight tiredness mixed with curiosity. Sure, I replied, making a hand gesture inviting her to sit down. She sank into the chair opposite and placed a cup of tea in front of her. You look like you just closed an important chapter of your life, she said, smiling slightly. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by her observation. It is, I admitted, taking a sip of coffee. Is that good or bad? I hesitated, then smiled and looked her straight in the eye. Definitely good. She nodded, as if she knew what I was talking about, and then held out her hand to me. My name is Rachel. I shook her hand, feeling something inside slowly but surely change. Ronald. We just sat and talked. No thoughts, no fears, no attachment to the past. I didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready for something new. And maybe that's how a real happy life begins. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. If you like the story, please give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm show my content more often. If you are new to the channel, do not forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep making more stories for you.